Hello, welcome to another edition of Meet the Solutionaries on greentv.com. And we have a guest that's going to be talking about two of the biggest stories in the last couple of weeks that I've heard on the subject of plastic. My guest from Toronto. Welcome to Chelsea Rochman, Dr. Chelsea Rochman, an assistant professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. I like the sound of that, at the University of Toronto, where it says you're also on the trash team. Now, you have no idea how exciting that is to me, because I started Trash Talk Green Features way back on Earth Day 1997, reduce, reuse, recycle, and rot, and went from garbage to global warming over the years. But I really want to hear about that trashy team, so don't let me forget to ask. But we are going to jump right in because there's, like I said, two big stories that have come out recently. First, we'll start with a headline that for the first time, I guess, microplastic has been found in human bloodstreams. Now, we heard a couple of years ago that I think we're on average consuming about a credit card's worth of plastic every week, if I can recall that correctly. That was shocking enough. But to hear that it's in our bloodstream, I don't know, maybe that's like what you would expect. Maybe it's shocking. It certainly is worth talking about. So welcome to the program. And let's jump right in again. And the other issue is microfibers that come from our synthetic materials, like, all the polyester and clothing items that we have, and other things that you wash, and they get into the filter and apparently getting into our water system. And one of the things I want to find out is I compost the lint, and maybe that's not a good thing to do. So don't let me forget to ask you about that as well. So you can tell we got a lot to talk about. So plastics, I mean, those of us old enough to remember The Graduate, when Dustin Hoffman famously said the future is plastic, and that sounded so promising back then. And now we know the error of our ways. It can be obviously omnipresent, which it is, and certainly not planet friendly. And yet how the heck do we reduce it, let alone get rid of it? So hope you have some answers for us. Certainly we'll take a deep dive into the problem. So again, welcome. And where should we start?
First of all, thank you for having me. And I think where I'll start, if it's okay for you, is actually with The Graduate, and then going into those two stories. You're right? There was a time right after World War II or decades after where plastic we thought was the future, right? It was this material that is durable, that is it's cheap. You can turn it into many different things. And there was this great future in plastic is what we thought. It was also convenient. All of a sudden, if you're, for example, about to have a dinner party, you could go from having to wash a bunch of dishes to being able to throw them all in the garbage can. So we've created this really convenient culture, which, to quote Al Gore, has an inconvenient truth. And so we now produce almost 400 million metric tons of plastic per year. And about half of that are these single-use plastic items that we use once and then we throw away. And so it's kind of been this increase in this type of material that we have not been using in the most sustainable way that has led to the issue of plastic pollution. And when we first started learning about plastic pollution, we were learning about big fishing nets and bottles and bags that were in the middle of the ocean and washing up on beaches in the stomachs of whales, etc. But over time, we started to learn that material breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, which brings us to the microplastics that you were talking about.
And that happens in bodies of water like the ocean, where there are fish that we catch and turn into seafood, which we eat. And is that why we're now seeing it in our bloodstreams? I guess that would be the method.
Yeah, so that is one way. So over time with plastics, one way plastic can get into the environment is we litter it, or it goes into a waste management system that doesn't keep it contained, and it ends up littered, even if we think we're putting it into a dump, for example. Over time, that breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, which would be microplastic. If it ends up in the ocean, it can be ingested or eaten by animals that you and I consume as seafood. But it can also get into other sources of food that we eat, so including freshwater sources or terrestrial. Cows, for example, or camels. But the other thing is that as I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm wearing clothes that are made out of synthetic materials, and I'm sitting in a room with carpet and a plastic chair, and those materials degrade over time. So it's also in floating around in the air that we are sitting in and that we are breathing. So if you think about, when you look at your window and you have that light streaming in and you see all those little bits of dust, some of those are plastic material. And so the way that plastic gets into us is through our drinking water, through the air that we breathe, and through the food that we eat.
Are you surprised that it's been found in our blood?
So unfortunately, I'm not. I think we've known that we've been exposed to this material for a while. So I've known that I've been eating these microplastics. There was a paper that came out maybe a year ago about microplastics in human feces. The reason I think it wasn't detected in our blood before is because we didn't know how to look for it. So we've been using this material for a while. It seems everywhere we look for these microplastics, we tend to find them. And now we have methods to be able to look for and quantify the smaller pieces. And it's those smaller pieces that might eventually circulate in our bloodstream. So was I surprised to see the paper? I mean, of course, right? It hadn't been found yet. Any new scientific discovery is interesting. Was I surprised that there were microplastics in human blood? I think I would have predicted that would be what the researchers would find had they looked. Now we look in the bodies of other animals. We look in fillets of fish, for example. We look in livers of fish. We've looked in the blood of tiger sharks. So we find microplastic in these types of organs. So we just don't study humans.
Not to mention fish, marine life.
Yeah, so most of the work that I do is either in the marine environment or in the freshwater environment.
How concerned are you about this? Let's just talk health, personal health, not planetary health yet.
Personal health. Yeah, I did my PhD in marine ecology now almost 10 years ago. And I got it in ecotoxicology because I was really interested in toxins and the chemicals that we produce and use and that end up in the environment and can end up in our bodies. Am I concerned about microplastics? Yes, but I'm also concerned about, pesticides and other contaminants. I know too much.
I understand that.
By thinking about these things all the time, right? Yeah. Ignorance is bliss, I think, when it comes to the types of chemicals that we may be exposed to. But, the truth is that for how microplastics may impact human health, we don't know very much right now. We know that we eat it. There's been numbers of how much we eat per week. We know that we poop it out. We now know that it's in our blood. Understanding how it impacts human health right now, we're sitting on maybe 10 studies. So there's a lot to learn. So I'm concerned, yes, and I think we need more research in order to better understand it so that we can answer these questions of how much is too much.
Since plastic is inert, prepare for dark humor here. Does that mean we might live longer?
Man, would that be good or bad?
The plastic lasts forever, pretty much, and it's flowing through our bloodstream. Maybe that could be a green lining to the cloud.
There you go. Yeah, I don't know.
Sorry, weird sense of humor. It's the only way I can cover this speech for 20 plus
years. Hey, I appreciate it.
So no, plastic pollution is not only something that is now harming, wildlife, but now humans and also the planet, certainly big time. Water, we're so aware of it. I mean, the one thing about plastic pollution, it's gotten just a ton of, mainstream attention in the last few years where it wasn't 5-10 years ago. So good for you for going into something so topical. How did you know? And that is, really so disturbing. If you've seen any of the films, documentaries, seeing plastic bottles bobbing up and down on the ocean floor. Of course, we've all seen, littered. We often wish cycle. Some of us who look at, the bottom side of the bottle and, okay, this is recyclable, but wonder if it really is. There's just so much of it. And it's so darn hard to figure out how can we reduce it, because it is everywhere. And even if you don't allow them in your house, plastic bottles, which we pretty much don't, if you don't bring your own thermos on a flight or something, my husband likes to buy bottles of water and I just cringe and, yeah, you can't have it before, the thermos, they'll make you dump out. So after you get the security, you buy the water. It's unavoidable. That's the bottom line. What on earth and in the oceans and rivers and ponds of the planet, can we do?
Yeah, actually, I think there's a lot that we can do. And to go back to that point that you said earlier of, before a lot of people weren't aware of it, and now it seems like it's in the media almost every day. That's true. When I started my PhD in 2008, I would tell people what I worked on, and it wasn't something that was in the media. It wasn't something that people were talking about, and it was only mostly being discussed in the middle of oceans. I started my work in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, 1,000 miles out to sea in the middle of the ocean. But in thinking about where it comes from, I slowly moved closer and closer to shore. So I guess what's been really nice is that you're starting to see people talk about this issue more and more. The science on it has expanded exponentially, what we know about it, but so has the political public awareness, but also political awareness. So both in Canada and the United States, the amount of policies that are starting to be implemented about plastic pollution is really great. And at UNEA 5, just a few weeks ago, the first resolution passed to create a binding agreement on plastic pollution. So we're starting to see movement. And then that question is, what do we do about it, right? We have this moment, governments are listening, the United Nations is listening, let's not screw it up. So it's this idea of what are we going to do? So what I think we need to do is I think we need to, I don't think the way that we could just ban pesticides, for example, like DDT. I don't think we can necessarily ban all plastics. I don't think that's what we're going to see. But we can get rid of the plastic products that we know don't fit into a circular economy, for example, that can't be reused again and again and again. So I said earlier, about 50% of that plastic that we make is made into these single-use items. If we could replace the non-essential single-use items with reusable materials, that would help a lot. We need to create a circular economy. A circular economy meaning we need to create, right now, our plastic economy is we make it, we use it, we throw it away. And go ahead.
And if we recycle it, does that really do anything? Is it really recycled?
Sometimes, sometimes not, but most of it isn't, right? So over the years in the United States today, we recycle, well, actually over the entire landscape of plastic, all plastic has ever been made, only 9% has been recycled.
9.
And in Canada, we recycle 9 to 11%. And I think the United States is identical. So you hear a lot of people say recycling doesn't work. Recycling is a myth. Recycling is not the answer. And there's a good reason why people say that. If you produce a product like a water bottle that can truly be recycled into another water bottle, you have a material that can fit into a circular economy. But if you produce a plastic product, which most of them are, that like think about a floss container that has multiple types of plastic on it and a piece of metal, when you put that in your recycle bin, it's a mixed material and it's not easy to just be, because all recycling is right now, general mechanical recycling is wash it, break it into lots of pieces, melt it down into a new type of plastic.
And that's a typical perfect example of a product that won't have a number on the bottom of it. And so even people like me who are really into this don't know, does that mean am I going to muck up the works at the transfer station if I put it in to the plastic recycling bin, or should I throw it away? And I get upset about this because, why can't it be more easy to figure out? That's half the battle. And then the other is, what do we do with these materials? But like, what's the general rule of thumb for those things that are not, water bottles or something that would have a number in a triangle at the bottom, whether or not it actually gets recycled or not?
It completely depends on the city in which you live in. So A, we need to make products that are practically recyclable, but B, we should harmonize it across the system. And you asked me earlier, don't let you forget to talk about the U of T trash team. So the U of T trash team is an organization that I started with a couple other friends and collaborators. And our main mission is to increase waste literacy. And that is to allow us all as a public, right, to feel like how our materials are managed is transparent and have an understanding of how we can use that material and waste that material if we have to waste it more sustainably. But ideally, we don't waste it and we reuse and reduce and recycle when it works. But you're absolutely right. In the United States, I'm not sure how much this has been discussed. In Canada, they are trying to harmonize the waste stream, meaning that in one city to another,
harmonize the waste stream. Harmonize the waste stream. I've never heard those words.
Yeah, harmonize the waste stream would be.
I like the way it sounds.
Every city can recycle the same things, and the products that come to you ideally are more likely to be recycled. So you can have an extended producer responsibility system, which tells a producer you pay for the material that eventually becomes waste. You pay more when doesn't have a sustainable end of life. you pay less when it does, and you try to incentivize the making of materials that can go into a blue bin. You try to reduce what goes in your landfill. Ideally, you eventually get to zero plastic in a landfill. That would be amazing.
You're talking would be, right? This is what we should do, because producer package responsibility, I was talking about on Trash Talk 2 decades ago, has it spread, or was it just like the recycler's dream?
So it was like a word that you could not say out loud in the United States just a few years ago. And now they're starting to say it out loud and talk about it.
Oh, we were way ahead of our time, we trash talkers.
You were.
And
Absolutely.
we were pointing to Germany and their dot system that was so advanced. So you're saying that even though we were, those trashy people that I hung out with, still do proudly, we're talking about producer responsibility. It really hasn't infiltrated manufacturing industry at all.
It's only just in the United States. So it's only just starting to be okay to discuss with producers now. But in Canada, they've had an extended producer responsibility scheme in many provinces for quite some time. And as you note, in Germany and Japan, so you have these in different parts of the world. But I think in the United States, they're not going to get away with not having one for very much longer. There is policies right now. California is kind of, going to say California is on fire. That's not a good pun. I'm staring at your background with fire, but they are on a roll with their plastic policies. And usually things in California start to spread across the US and then sometimes up into Canada. But Canada's also been pushing some good plastic policies. So hopefully they start to spread. And the Biden administration is certainly interested in plastic. And there's a bill, the Break Free from Plastic bill, that's on the table that has a lot of really good stuff in there, which includes things that incentivize the circular economy, reduce single-use plastic, and then trap and prevent some of these microplastics from going out into the environment.
Okay, so California, that's where I grew up and went to school and raised my daughter. Don't live there anymore, but they are first. As California goes, so goes the rest of the nation. Most of the time, we like to think more eco-forward people live there, and that kind of makes sense given how beautiful it is on the coast and the weather. And so we started to see cities ban, plastic bags at the grocery store, and even some plastic water bans. Have those made any noticeable headway, and are they spreading, or was that just another wish cycling event?
So I think that they haven't done nothing, right? So there's a place for all of these different types of legislation. So the bag bans and bottle bans wherever they exist, and styrofoam container bans, those do keep those materials right out of the waste stream and out of the environment where they have those. But the things California is doing now are more systemic. So it's more like having legislation about kind of a suite of single-use plastic items that are non-sustainable and not essential. Truth in recycling, so making sure that it is very clear right on the material whether or not you can actually recycling it. So there's a truth in recycling bill. They created legislation that said you had to quantify microplastics in your drinking water and figure out a threshold for human health. They right now have a bill for filters on washing machines to prevent microplastics from your washing machine from ending up into the environment. They have a bill against plastic manufacturers allowing their pellets to go down storm drains and enter into the environment. So it's at a more foundational level that would impact the plastic economy versus a bag ban or a straw ban, which aren't nothing, right? But they're more, they don't do as much, right, as these more systemic changes.
You mentioned styrofoam, something I avoid at all costs, but it's even someone like me and you, probably it's impossible completely. That's never recyclable, right? And will that also, like most plastics, just sit in the landfill for hundreds of years?
So styrofoam can be recyclable, but if there's a market for it. And so sometimes, for example, you are allowed to put it in your recycle bin, but there has to be a market for it and a plant, right, that will take it and recycle it. But there's lots of different.
How would the consumer know? Because if that happens every Tuesday and Thursday, or one month they're doing it, 1 month, because it depends on the demand for these materials. So that's why recycling is so confusing.
It does. And in the city of Toronto, we are told we can put it in our bin, but then I've been told by someone who works for waste management in the city, that a lot of time that material doesn't actually get recycled because the market isn't there. So sometimes you put all the stuff in the bin hoping that that market will be there, and it's not. So I fully understand that recycling often doesn't seem satisfying. It can work, but at this moment it never has.
No, and we've been doing it. This is not a new thing, recycling. Let's talk about microfibers, because that's a relatively new discovery, that just doing our wash, and those of us who are sort of eco-obsessed will do less laundry. Tell my husband, who thinks he sweats at night and needs to wash his pajamas after one wearing. I wear mine for 3-4 nights, some clothes for 3-4 days, whatever. It went until they're dirty, actually dirty. And we were saving money, and the energy it takes to heat up the water, unless you, as we're supposed to, use cold water washes, we do. But the fact that there's now a third cost to doing a load of laundry, which back in the old days didn't give a second thought to that being polluting. But in fact, this is a big problem. Was that just recently discovered? Just suddenly I started hearing about it. And there are products, I guess, now that you can put into your dryer that will catch the microfibers and then keep them from the waterways. Even if you compost them, is that still going to help keep them out of the waterways? Because I've been composting my lint, thinking that was a good thing to do.
Yeah, so the reason, well, it depends on your compost facility, but if you're composting it and it's going into kind of yard soil, that the lint is full of synthetic microfibers. So most clothing right now, I think about 60% of the clothing market is polyester, which is plastic. And so I would say it's probably better to throw it in the landfill, unfortunately, which just sends it, put it in your black bin or whatever color that bin is. In Toronto, it's black, and then it goes to the landfill, keeps it out of the environment. But microfibers, I'd say, as people started to learn how to quantify and detect smaller and smaller plastics in the environment, we started seeing a lot of these long stringy things that were not necessarily made out of polypropylene or nylon, like fishing debris. They were made out of polyester and acrylic and things that we wear, and cotton. So denim, blue jeans, we find cotton with indigo dye, which is from our blue jeans. And a guy named Mark Brown, who lives in Australia, linked it to our washing machine effluent, which ends up in the environment. And so we knew that was a source, and we know microfibers are very prevalent in nature. So we actually did a test we published it in 2019, but around 2017, I had 2 undergrads working in the lab, and I basically asked them to do laundry for their summer research project and do some loads without a trap on their filter and do some loads with a trap on their filter. And what we found was that the filters were getting about 90% of those microfibers that we could count out of the washing machine effluent, meaning it would not go out into the world where it could enter the environment. And so this we thought was great. And I had a PhD student, Lisa Ertl, who came on and wanted to, and she ended up helping out with that study, and then wanted to lead a second study where we sort of scaled it up. So we worked with a nonprofit called Georgian Bay Forever. And in a small town of Parry Sound, right on Lake Huron, we put filters in the homes of almost 100 volunteers. And so they volunteered to put these free filters that we gave them on their washing machine. It was about 10% of the town. And we put the filters on, and then we measured, before we put the filters on, the amount of fibers coming out in the wastewater into the lake. And then after we put the filters on, we measured again. And we could actually see a measurable reduction, a significant reduction in the amount of microfibers going into leaving a wastewater treatment plant within that town after the 100 people put these traps on their home. So those 2 studies right now are going to inform legislation. There's a bill in California, there's a bill in France, there's one here in Ontario. There is a federal bill, but I don't know where it will go in the United States, that would suggest that people who make washing machines, so the manufacturers, have to put these filters on the washing machine, so that when you and I buy one, the filter's there and we clean it out just like we clean out our dryer lint trap.
Okay, since most people are not going to stop washing their clothes, and those who are conscientious and want to do something about this newly discovered problem, the good news is there is a device. And I guess a couple of manufacturers are making something that you can put right there into the filter. And who's making them? And are there going to be more of them? And I hope they're affordable, because it sounds like we certainly need them. Widespread need them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so they are definitely available, and I would say they're not super expensive. So there's a company that makes one called the Filtrol, and the Filtrol is what we used in our experiment. I think it's about $100 on Amazon, and it's pretty easy to install in your own house. There's a couple other companies. There's one called the Lint Lover, which is here in Canada, and I think some others that I don't know the names off the top of my head. And these are useful because even if there is legislation that passes that tells manufacturers to make new washing machines, we don't buy new washing machines that often. So many of us will be using the same one that we have for a while, which is not a bad thing, right? It's good to be able to use the same materials for a long time. So these types of products are good because they're just as efficient as one that was built into the washing machine.
So do you think that washing machine manufacturers are going to start putting these inside, and that could be a marketing plus? Do you think we'll need legislation to make them do that? What do you see there?
I mean, I see the legislation moving down the pipeline, so I think the writing is on the wall. So it's just a question of whether or not that legislation will pass. But I have heard rumbles of there's pushback from the kind of umbrella organization for those industries. But I've also heard some companies say, well, we are starting to build them in or figure out how we can build them in. So
And
they hear.
the pushback, what's their justification for not caring that we're totally polluting not only our planet, but our bodies?
You know, I can't say that I fully know, but the concerns that are raised is
Cost.
whether or not it would flood if if the filter backed up. I'm sure it costs money to change the factory line, right? To put this thing in. So I don't know. I haven't heard anything. We didn't have any issues with flooding during this experiment. So I haven't heard anything yet that makes me think, oh, maybe we shouldn't be moving forward with this.
Since you study what happens in oceans as part of your work, how concerned are you about the acidification of oceans? I know that's not exactly your area, maybe it is, but that and overfishing and the plastic pollution are the big three ocean killers. I mean, we don't talk about that enough, do we?
It's funny. I'm teaching a class in conservation biology and biodiversity, and I'm teaching a section on marine, and we're talking about ocean warming. And so we're talking about ocean acidification and coral bleaching, and overfishing is not, I guess, as relevant to climate change, but it is a multiple stressor. So we also talk about fishing. And when you look at a lot of the United Nations policies on climate change, the oceans for a long time had sort of been left out. And the oceans are so important, right? We get so much of the oxygen that we breathe from them. We get so much of the nutrients, right? Our own resources from the oceans, plus it's 70% of the planet, right? It's our blue planet. So what's good is that
absorbing CO2. It's a sink.
Huge sink. Yeah.
What could possibly go wrong?
Right? Yeah, so at least that are starting to see some attention turned to the oceans, because historically they haven't been kind of front and center as we've been making some of these policies. But John Kerry, when he was Secretary of State, his sort of pet project was to create this Our Ocean meeting, where it brought together heads of state from all over the world, and they all had to make these commitments toward protecting our ocean. And they were all about overfishing and climate change and pollution.
We just heard that the barrier reef off Australia just had another extinction event. I said 6 just because we're in the 6th mass extinction, first one caused by humans, but I'm mixing up 2 different things. What causes a mass bleaching event? Do you have any idea, like how it can happen overnight almost?
So what happens is you have the water reaching a temperature that is not comfortable for so the coral reefs themselves, right, as if they are foundational species that create an ecosystem, a habitat for other animals to live, but they have these little algae that live inside of them that give them fuel. It's a necessity. And when it gets too warm and they get stressed, the algae flee. And so that algae is what gives them their color, and then the coral turns white. And if the algae don't come back for too long, if that heat persists, then the coral itself can die, and then other algae can start to take over the reef. And so, and it used to be that you had these cycles, and so you'd have this bleaching, but then the algae would come, the good algae would come back, the zooxanthellae. But now the intensity and the frequency of these events are increasing so much that you're actually seeing die off of coral reefs. So have a lot of colleagues that work in the Great Barrier Reef, and for them, it's challenging to do their work because these ecosystems they've been studying forever are really changing and not for the good.
And I've heard, here and there about some technology that's been invented that can restore coral to their original health. Is anything viable on the horizon or here yet? It's hard to imagine going in and polishing them or whatever you do.
All I'm really aware of are kind of like creating these coral like refugia. So you have these areas where it's kind of a refuge for coral, where maybe the water is cooler, they do well there. You can snap off a piece of coral and grow new coral. And so sometimes they transplant these corals into different areas, but I'm not super familiar with some of the technology that's being created and engineered. And
well, like carbon sucking technology, it's more talk, or clean coal than reality, unfortunately. So just hearing about something that sounds promising doesn't mean it's actually in the real world working. And then how do you scale that up, even if it does? Okay, so what have we not talked about that's in your lane, your area of specialty and purview?
Yeah, I guess I would turn it into, as you mentioned before, kind of what are some of the things that people can do, right? So we started the U of T trash team really interested in thinking about how we can use the science in order to inform solutions, and how we can work with the public to increase waste literacy and empower them to do something, right? So that people don't feel the doom and gloom. They feel empowered to change. They vote with their wallet. We have some power, right? So I think some of the things that we can do is, one, we can always try to change at the larger scale. We can write letters to politicians, and we can not buy certain things to support certain industries and not support others. I think it's incredibly important, as we talked about before, to know exactly how to deal with your waste, right? To be able to reduce the amount of waste that goes to landfill and increase the amount of materials that we reuse, and if we have to use materials that we recycle. So getting to know the waste management system in your home, where you live in the city, and trying to purchase materials that fit into it sustainably. I think it's also important to do little things that might reduce the amount of microplastics that we allow to escape into the environment. So that's buying filters on washing machines can make a big difference, but even washing your clothes less, as you said before. Volunteering with local organizations to do cleanup. I know cleanup is not the solution. It can be people argue that it's a bit of a Band-Aid, but until we cut it off at the source, the cleanup is necessary. But the cleanup also can inform the types of solutions we need to work on upstream. So for example, when we clean up, the majority of what we find are cigarette butts and pre-production plastic pellets and foam from construction. So things we can do around there is bylaws on construction companies to not allow the foam siding on the house to escape into the environment, stopping plastic production companies from allowing those pellets to go down the drain. And then on the cigarette butt front, it's a tough one. I don't know if you have more ashtrays out, or educating people that cigarette pollution is plastic pollution.
People still smoke, really?
A lot of people still smoke. We find a lot of cigarette butts in our traps. We have sea bins on the waterfront, and the number one thing we find are still cigarette butts.
Are our landfills filling up, or was that just kind of a myth and we have much bigger problems like what's coming out of our tailpipes and factory pipes now?
I think we absolutely have to have hope, right? I think that if we all lay down everything we're trying to do because we're too overwhelmed by the size of the problem, then we become part of the problem. And so I think every little bit counts. We got here by one piece of litter at a time entering into the environment. And so everybody trying to help and fix this problem, I think, makes a huge difference. I think, I'm seeing politicians turn to it. I'm seeing the United Nations turn to it. I'm seeing, we'll see what happens with industry. I understand that it's a very large industry and it's hard to make change, but
what about
I'm not willing to give up my hope, I guess.
Either. What about those trash bags? They're plastic. So it's not even like whatever's inside those trash bags is going to biodegrade over years if it's inside plastic, right? Which almost every trash bag seems to be. Is that a problem?
When you go to a landfill, a lot of the trash bags are opened at that point, right? So there will be some materials that will degrade and some that will persist. The issue with plastic is that it persists for a very long time. So you really do want to use the least amount of it that you can that will be single use. And yes, you're right, trash bags are made out of plastic. There's a reason for that, because a lot of times our trash bags are not dry. People are putting materials in there that are wet and soiled. And
I've seen compostable bags for like little trash bins that you keep in your kitchen, but I haven't seen them for large garbage bags. Maybe that's just because they're too fine and thin and, would break too easily.
yeah, and those bags are often industrially compostable. So they only are compostable in a particular waste management system.
Right. Okay. Well, let's see. What have we not touched on? Your trash team just sounds great. Is that a big draw? And if so, are you surprised? I hope it is popular, more so than at least one would expect.
Yeah, the trash team it's a group of about 85. It's in youth in some way, right? It's university students from University of Toronto, but also nearby campuses, Ryerson and York, that come together to try to do things to increase waste literacy and reduce plastic pollution. So we do cleanups in the community. We trap trash on the waterfront with sea bins. They do research projects to try to figure out kind of what are the big sources of plastic. We do case studies. So this summer we're going to be purchasing reusable coffee cups, for example, for cafes, to get them to test out and pilot these types of programs where basically you come in, they give you a cup, you use it, then you put it in a receptacle outside and they wash it and you use it again. So trying to increase the amount of reusables in our city in cafes and restaurants. So yeah, the trash team gives me a lot of hope. Youth are still motivated. They will get out there and they will do things, and you can make local change on the ground. So the trash team is great, because the other side of what I do is research on the problem. And while that can be really rewarding and empowering, it can also sometimes be, a little more heavy.
Okay, so last question, then I'll let you get back to your important work. And I'm not saying that in any humorous sense. I love what you're doing, and I wish more professors were. Maybe they are, since I was in school, certainly. But so in Manhattan, you can't, plastic is unavoidable. As careful as I am, bring my cloth bags to the stores almost always, but you do forget. So I've got a cabinet full of plastic that when my husband opens it, it just falls on his head. But I've been trying to find a place that will take them and recycle that. And in California, you could drop them back off at the grocery store. Not so easy to find here. Any suggestions? Because it's building up. It's taking up a lot of space, a lot of real estate.
Yeah, I would look it up in your city. I think plastic bags are recyclable as long as there's a market for it. So it depends on, if a grocery store or place has a take back plan, you want to just be able to shove all those bags into one bag, tie it up, and take it to the place that'll take it.
They don't.
But I don't know if you don't have it in your state. I don't.
And you can't put plastic bags. A lot of people don't know this, including my husband somehow. You can't put plastic bags into the recycling. That's not recyclable in the,
right. You have to take them somewhere else.
Picture.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
so
right.
It's still a big problem. Like I said, I'm careful, and I still got way too much.
Yeah, we're the same.
I can't bring myself to throw it away, so it'll probably be here longer than I am.
Yeah, no, we're the same.
I
can relate.
Well, we trash people, proud to be. We do relate. Thank you so much for your great work. It's just been fabulous speaking with you. Chelsea Rochman, Dr. Chelsea Rochman, you're a PhD, you're really smart, and I hope you do so much for waste literacy. I talk about how we need to improve our eco-literacy in this country, and probably your country as well. So that is so important. And,
thank you so much for having me.
And it's been a pleasure, truly. And I want to invite everybody to go to our YouTube channel and please subscribe to Green TV. The sooner we get up to 1,000 subscribers, and we're getting there, but a little too slowly because we don't have a marketing budget, just spreading word organically, we can start live streaming, which will just be so much fun. And then our editor, Christine Weiss, doesn't have to make little edits, and we can be in real time, which we almost are, but not quite. So please spread the word, because this affects everybody, right? I don't know anybody who doesn't make trash. And I don't know anyone who's plastic free, even though there's a couple of people out there who've written books about it. And there are a lot of things you can do. I should probably I think Beth Terry was one of the authors of Living a Plastic Free Life. So at least there's more awareness. Let's hope that translates into preventative, proactive action. Thanks so much. Have a great green day.